CPOE Lab, in-house lab orders and results. Many of you may have an internal lab service within your practice, whether it is a full-blown outpatient lab where you're billing for everything and you have LOI and C codes for your billing and all that, or you're just simply doing simple specimens in-house and then through courier sending them out. Whatever the case, when it comes to ordering the lab within Prognosis, we've already covered creating and printing lab orders when it's an external patient service care center. The process of doing it in-house is really no different as far as the required data and the screen workflow. There's just a couple of exceptions with regards to setup and the fact that you can post results immediately. So before we go into the chart and actually order a in-house lab test, I'm first going to take you under our settings configuration. Now this of course is typically handled through your implementation process. If you have not yet done a lab setup, you can of course go through our help desk and technical support will help you. When it comes to setting your vendor, this does of course require configuration access to your user login. I'm going to go under my vendor's lab master, and I've already created one called Inhouse, so I'm just going to open that to show you. You would of course, if it was your first time, click Add New. You can name it whatever you want. For simplistic purposes, I'm simply calling it in-house. Regardless of what you name it, the most important factor is this in-house checkbox. You do want to make sure that you have designated the lab as in-house. Now the system will only allow one in-house lab. So if you were to try to set another one as in-house, this option will be disabled once you've already assigned one. With regards to your address, contact details, that's entirely up to you if you need to key that level of data. If you need it for reporting mechanisms, it's not a requirement in the system, however. The supported test section, notice we have the choice need to be explicitly defined, supports all tests, and then same as vendor tests. The need to be explicitly defined is primarily used for our eLab interfaces. Many clients do choose to use this for their in-house as well to prevent margin for error. Maybe there are only specific tests you do in-house, and you do not want your technicians who order the labs to maybe make a mistake and order the wrong kind of test in-house that really needs to go outside to LabCorp or Quest or another vendor. So if you choose to make it explicitly defined, I'm just going to go ahead and click Save there. There's going to be another piece of setup I'm going to show you next to set up those tests. Now, if you do leave it as supports all tests, then any test that is in your database can be ordered to that vendor. None of these other fields are relevant for in-house setup, so I am not going to discuss those at this time. And I'm going to go back to my settings configuration. Down here under my input elements, tests, and templates, lower right, I have a section called Lab. Very similar to setting up your templates, as we've discussed in your Creating Templates video, you can also categorize your labs. So if you want to have an in-house category, you can. You can be generalized like blood test, chemistry, pathology, urine. You could get really specific if you wanted to when it comes to vendor specific, for instance. So I'm just going to go ahead and create one called in-house. That's simply for local use and preference as to how you want to compartmentalize your testings. And in this case, since we want to make them specific, I just think that'll make it a little easier. Now, when I go to my test master, you're going to see there's already dozens of tests in here. By default, all of your common labs with various categories. So your library will come preloaded with tests. If you start off with an empty database and you have an eLab interface, this will be preloaded with your lab vendor's compendium as far as the tests they support. And this lab code may be their actual test ID. What you see here is our test ID. So I'm just going to go ahead and say Add New. And let's say you are going to do a urinalysis in-house for drug screening. So you simply name the test what you want. I'm going to choose my in-house category. Key is up here in your test type. You want to let it go to the default of both order and result so that you can not only order it but also attach a result. You can make your test gender specific if you so desire. If it's only for females, of course, you could change it so. I'm going to leave it for both genders. Sequencing number would be relevant when you want them to appear in a certain order on your list. By default, everything that you create is set to a sequence of 1,000 and is then alphabetized within that sequence. When we go to our test search screen, You are able to search by category, so sequencing would be a locally decided choice if you want to make that in a different order. If you have an LOINC code for billing purposes of this test, you can go ahead and assign it. We've got a patient portal indicator. If you want to show all, hide all, or show only when the result is within normal range. That, of course, has more discussion in our patient portal setup. So those are all choices that you can make at a general level when creating your test. But the point of this demonstration was for specifically setting up an in-house test. Now, since this is for in-house screening, one thing that we want to make sure we do is assign the CPT HCPC. This, of course, is to make sure that when the bill is created, it has the correct coding. Normally, especially if you're doing with outside lab, you won't need this. But we're just going to go ahead and do a search here for the urine drug screening procedure code. And for training purposes here, we're just going to go ahead and choose the generic one. Of course, if you were doing it specifically for amphetamine, barbiturates, cocaine, and so on, you would choose the appropriate code. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And this time when we save the test, you'll notice that the CPT HCPC has a check mark to indicate that the code is present. And then the third step, since I marked the indicator in my vendor master, that test must be explicitly defined. What becomes the explicitly defined is when you get here to vendor tests. And this is where we're going to go ahead and choose our in-house lab, since we said test must be explicitly defined. Here in my category dropdown, I'm simply going to choose my in-house category, and I'm going to go ahead and choose my urinalysis and say save. Now that is available to order as an in-house lab. So that would be the setup you need. You want to set up your vendor as in-house and then set up all of the applicable tests. Now I'm going to go back to my patient's encounter. I'm going to go ahead and open up Donna's chart and order that urinalysis in-house for her. We do have the separate video I mentioned, creating and printing lab orders. So I'm not going to go through the details of filling in the screen. I'm simply going to choose my in-house vendor. Now, since I said tests are explicitly defined, my filtered list here is based on that filter. Dr. Cooper has not defined any preferred in-house test, so this screen is empty. So I am going to have to go to the all tests. But notice all I have here is my urinalysis because that's the only one I defined for my in-house master. And I'm going to save it. Now, when it's in-house, you have an option of setting the property so that you can post results without actually generating a requisition. So this approved status is sufficient. If you do want to print a paper requisition, you still can. But of course, if your lab is also using prognosis within the office, they can simply come into the lab order screen and see that this test needs to be done. Once they get the results for you, then they can simply come over here and maybe they're positive for barbiturates and save it. So by ordering it in-house, it is immediately available for entering the results. So in review of in-house lab orders and results, the first step would be to set up your in-house vendor. Next, you want to set up any of the tests that are applicable to be ordered in-house. Create your lab order as usual. Route the patient and the specimen based upon your local process. And then the results can be entered immediately. That concludes this video within the series. Please click the appropriate link below for your next step. If you'd like to take a quiz, you will receive your results in real time directly on the screen so that you can see how well you've done. If you answer incorrectly, the system will prompt you with the correct response. In addition, a confidential email will be sent to the education team to help us better serve you with our educational offerings. Second, advance to the next video within the series you're currently in. And finally, return to the video library main page. As always, feel free to contact us through the Resource Center or email with any additional questions or comments.